Welcome to my first video on the series on how to set up a Kubernetes cluster with a somewhat proper monitoring environment. I'm just saying it like that because it's probably not production grade, although perhaps some companies will use it that way in production. For this series you are gonna need a Kubernetes environment. I'm using a Google Cloud Platform, but you are free to use AWS, Azure, or any other cloud or on-premise setup that you have access to. Furthermore, I'm using iTerm 2, but you can use any shell that you want. You do, however, need kubectl. With kubectl, we get access to our cluster. As you can see, I've already set up my own cluster. This is just a simple cluster, nothing fancy, 3 nodes, 3 CPUs and somewhat memory. Because I'm using Google Cloud Platform, I just will show you a little detail about creating a cluster on the Google Platform, especially when you are using this for some test setup. There are a few things that you can insert here, such as the name and the zone. I recommend picking a zone that is close to you. Or if you want to protect your data, you can set it in some Europe region. As for the pools go, this is just fine. I'm just using the default 3 nodes, nothing fancy. Also for the nodes itself, just default, yet I'm using preemptible nodes. This is something special. It will mean that your node will live at most 24 hours. It will get destroyed somewhere in 24 hours time, but this is fine because we're using Kubernetes. If a node gets destroyed, a new one gets created, and that's the way Kubernetes most often work. Our pods are just fine by losing one node. It will just get rescaled to another node and we are fine. This is really great for testing purposes because it saves a lot of money. I don't really recommend using 100% preemptible nodes in production. You can use a bunch of them. I don't really recommend using only preemptible nodes. But this also really depends on what you are running on your cluster. As for our series, I'll be just working with nothing prepared. As you can see, my directory is empty, my editor is empty. I will just Google things, because this is the way most people actually work. Sure, we use just references on GitHub via Google or in your own organization, but there are hardly any people who know every command out of their head or have just basically all the intel in their head. It's just too massive. It's fine to use Google, it's fine to make mistakes. I will probably make a few, and I will just show you how I will deal with that. In my first step, I will just start up a simple application. I just want a deployment that deploys a simple Nginx HTTP file. So I'm just gonna search for that. Well, this is easy. And I just copy this entire file. Now it's fine to search resources on the internet, but you just really have to be careful on what you are copying. You have to check what you are going to apply to your cluster. So for now, I will just create a Nginx test app.yaml, and I'll paste in what we have found. In basic, it looks fine, but I'm just actually gonna check exactly what we are doing here. So our deployment is named Nginx deployment. This is fine for me. And we have a label, which is called app with the value Nginx, and we run 2 replicas. this is fine. I'm just gonna remove the comment because I really don't care. And in the spec, we can see our container running an image which contains Nginx with a specific version. This is also something I really want, so I'll just keep it like that. Something else that is important is the port. It's running on port 80, which makes sense because it's HTTP and that is port 80. So I'm just gonna go ahead and apply this file. Yet I'm gonna create the namespace for this. And as I'm lazy, I'm using KNS to switch between namespaces. I will just leave a description in the video. So now I'm switched to this namespace and I can apply this file to this namespace. And we have created our deployment. And we can see that the deployment is ready because we have 2 out of 2. So we should see our pods. And we do. Now, because this is a completely empty cluster with only now one namespace, there is no way for me to actually access my application right now. At least not from outside the cluster. But we can use kubectl to port forward this pod or our container towards our local host. And we can do this with kubectl port forward and then the pod name. So I'm just gonna copy this. And I will input my local host port. In this case, I'm using port 8080 because port 80 is already in use on my own machine. And the external port is 80 because that is the port that we defined for our deployment and containers. So now I'm just port forwarding this, and we should be able to access this on port 8080. And we can see our default Nginx template saying welcome to Nginx. Now that we have our application in place, I actually want to be able to access this application from the internet, so with a domain. In order to do this, I have to expose my pods. So there are a few requirements for this. First of all, I have to have a service, and on that service I can place an ingress. So I will open Paint Online to actually just show you a little bit of what's going on there. So I'm using these boxes for my containers. And let's just pretend that these are my Nginx app. And I'm running 3 of them, but they're all the same. I just have a replication of 3. So in order that these replications are useful, I can add a service on top of that. And this is my service. And the service just sort of load balances my request over there. Yet I have to expose my service to the public internet in order to be able to access my Nginx app. So we can add an ingress on top of this. And basically this is the flow that is being used. As I'm using also the Google Cloud Platform, I can actually just expose my service and a Google Cloud load balancer will be created. There are, however, a few downsides on this. For every service that I want to expose, I have to pay Google for the load balancer. The other side is that it's becoming quite difficult to keep managing everything if if I have multiple ingresses running, because then it will be just copy pasting this entire part on the side, and this is quite annoying. So what we can do for this is just to delete this part, and let me see if we can find that. We can delete this part. I hope you love my paint skills. And we can do it like this. And for me, the easiest way to do this is to use an Nginx Ingress for that. And this is what I'm going to show you in this video. So let's pretend I have no idea what the Nginx Ingress is. So I'll just search it. And as you can see, here's some documentation on how to set things up. I know a few things about this. So first of all, I'm just going to open the user guide eventually, because that's for later. But I will just search for a Helm chart that implements the Nginx Ingress controller. So, and we have found our resources that I want to use. I'm not saying that you should use Helm charts. For this case, I just really prefer it because it's a little bit easier. It really depends on your setup, on your company, on how you like to work. For the moment, I just prefer to use Helm. I'm not per se recommending it. What I'm not going to do is to go the really easy way of just issuing this command and have it set. It would probably work, but I wouldn't know what the hell I'm installing on my cluster. So what I'm going to do is just copy this, and I'm just going to fetch it locally. And I can use helm fetch for this. And as you can see, it has downloaded the package. So I can just unpack this. And delete the downloaded resources. Well, I should probably... Right, it's deleted. As you can see, I've got a new folder now. And this is basically the same as what can be found on GitHub. But now it gives me the opportunity to just actually properly check all the values that are in this file. So what I'm going to do is just check everything that is present in the values, and I'm just going to check if I need to change something or what the defaults actually are. And I really recommend that you do this for everything rather than just applying random files from the internet on your cluster. Just to be sure, the Nginx Ingress uses a controller and a default backend. So this is the section of the values for the controller itself. And I'm just gonna check for specific values that I might want to change or might not. And I can choose between a daemon set or a deployment. In my case, I'm just going for a deployment. I just want a simple setup. I don't need daemon sets. I don't need specific nodes that have access to the Nginx Ingress deployment is fine, and I guess it's fine for, well, a lot of cases. I really don't bother with the update strategy at the moment, so I'm just leaving that default. I also really don't care for affinity in this setup. And our replica count is 1, which is more than fine. Regarding our resources on limits and requests, again, this is just a fairly simple cluster. Even though would it be a little bit bigger cluster, I probably would leave it just empty. There are a few reasons. I know the Nginx Ingress controller. I know it's run stable. I'm not really scared that it will go out of bounds and wreck my cluster. Though if my cluster would receive a lot of hits, then I would probably set some limits. Other than that, I just keep it sane. Auto-scaling is not really required. Again, really simple cluster. And this is a funny part, a service monitor. We are eventually going to enable this, but as we have nothing to monitor and no application that is monitoring, I'm just leave this disabled for the time being, but I now know that there is a service monitor that I can enable for this controller. And the same goes for the Prometheus rules. And we also have the default backend here. I'm just gonna leave that enabled. This is fine because it allows me to test a little bit. The default backend is in place in case the Ingress receives a request from a host that is not defined, and all those requests will get routed to our default backend, which comes in handy. Again, it depends on your situation what you want to do with this. And I'm pretty sure the default backend settings are fine too. Role-based access, just leave that as it is. If you want more information about this, if you are unaware of what things are, please just look it up before you apply such a file. And this is fine. So I can just apply this configuration. But first I'm gonna create a namespace for this. I'm calling it Ingress Nginx, and I'm gonna switch to it. And again, I'm just gonna check the README on how would they install this. Well, obviously it's just helm install with the name. I'm gonna tweak that a little bit. I'm just gonna call a helm upgrade with the parameter install. This means I can reuse my command because I'm just telling please upgrade, and if this helm installation is not present yet on my cluster, install it. And I'm gonna name it Nginx Ingress, and it is the stable Nginx Ingress, and I want to use my values.yaml to install it. As you can see, the release does not exist, so it's installing it right now. This is actually quite funny. I have a conflict because there's also an ad-hoc authorization rule already present on this cluster. I sort of reused some parts of this cluster, so I'm just gonna check what's up. Existing kinds. And these are quite a lot. Probably not looking at the right way. Kind cluster roles for the ad-hoc authorization that already exists. Nginx Ingress. Probably not really actually. Ah, yes, it's already there. So I'm just gonna delete that one. And that's called Nginx Ingress. And I'm just gonna try it again. And we have a new one. This is the cluster role binding that already exists. So I'm just so, and we're gonna try again. Okay, so now it actually worked. So I'm just gonna check the pods that have been created. As you can see, it created an Ingress controller and our default backend. Now that we've seen our created containers and pods, we can just check for the service of this. Then we can see that our Ingress controller has actually received an external IP. So we can go ahead and check this out. And as you can see, we hit our default backend because we have no ingress or host defined, so it doesn't know where to route it, and therefore we get routed to our default backend. And this is also actually the goal that I wanted to show you. We have created a type of load balancer, and we are just gonna reuse this part to actually traffic our incoming traffic through the Nginx Ingress and just pass it through a Kubernetes service. So I'm gonna go back to our application, our Nginx app. As you can see, I'm running 2 pods and I don't have a service yet for this. So now I have to create a service. Again, let's pretend I don't know how to create a service. And we can see creating a service. They're using the kubectl expose command. As you can see, it will create this type of YAML file. I'm just gonna copy this. Now I've created my Nginx service.yaml, and as you can see, we have the kind service with my Nginx as name. I'm just gonna call this Nginx app service with the same label. This service uses a selector to find out where it has to route this traffic to. In this case, it's set to run with the value my Nginx. If we grab our application, we can see that we have given this a label app with the value Nginx. So we have to adjust our service here to app Nginx. And that's enough for our service. So I'm just gonna apply this. I actually have to move up a folder. And we have created our service. As we are running 2 containers here, 2 pods actually, I just want to show you what the use is of a service. Because even without an ingress, we can just use port forward again, but this time on the service. And we can do this by just prefixing it with the service and the name of the service. Again, I'm just using 8080 on localhost, and the service is again on port 80, so I'm just gonna use this. And back to localhost on 8080, and we again see our default page. Every time we refresh, we either hit one of the 2 pods that we have in place. So it's actually load balancing via the service, rather than just port forwarding straight to one particular pod. So now we have our application in place, we got 2 pods running, we got our service in place, and we also have an Nginx Ingress controller. So the last thing that we need to do is to actually create an ingress that uses the Nginx Ingress controller. And I'm just going to back to the page on how to use it, and we can see here some basic usages. And we actually see here that they are defining a kind of ingress. So I'm just gonna copy this. And I have already created a folder that's called Nginx Ingress, so just for the sake of it, I'm calling this ingress nginx.yaml. I'm really sorry if you have OCD. And I'm calling this ingress Nginx app. And the most important part of this is the annotation. With this annotation, we are defining that we are using an ingress class, and we're using the class Nginx. And this is the Nginx Ingress controller that we used. In the specification, we are defining some rules. One of the rules is the host. Currently, I didn't have set up any domains pointing towards the Google Cloud Load Balancer. I will do that in the next video. So for now, I'll just make something up. I'm calling this Nginx app.test. And it is HTTP, and the path is just about everything. And the service name is my service A. This is not our service, because we named our service Nginx app service. So I'm just go ahead and change that. The service port itself is port 80, and that's fine. So I'm just gonna apply this. And as you can see, we have created the ingress. Now, because I have used this host, I will have to change something in my own host file. And actually, before I can do that, I have to know the IP. So I'm just gonna open a new window, and I'm gonna get the service of the Nginx Ingress, and I'll just grab the external IP. So in my own computer, I'm just defining that that IP is that host, so that we can test it. Basically, if I have done everything correctly, I should be able to use this host and actually get redirected to my Nginx app service, and therefore see the default screen. And we do. So a little recap on what we did. First of all, we have created two replicas of just a simple Nginx application. Basically, there is no application running, it's just the default Nginx HTML template saying you have correctly installed Nginx. Then we have created a service. This service just redirects traffic to either pod of our Nginx app. On top of that, we have created an ingress of the type Nginx because we are running an Nginx Ingress controller. This allows us to use one load balancer on cluster level, for external cluster level. We use the load balancer from Google Cloud, and everything gets load balanced through our Nginx Ingress. And from that Nginx Ingress, it just comes to our service and therefore to our application. I have added my domain name to my own host file because I haven't set up a domain name yet. Thanks for watching. I will leave some links in the description so you can just easily read things by yourself. In our next videos, we will continue checking for securing it, adding HTTPS, and actually getting started with implementing something like Prometheus and Grafana to actually monitor our cluster.